Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Mark's English History channel, and in one of my short videos at the area filming at various sites around the Ypres Salient in Belgium, site of some serious fighting in the First World War and where the British forces were for over 4 years. Now I've come up to an area called Langemack, and the reason I'm up here is that this is the site of the German cemetery, military cemetery here at Langemack, here on Ypres. Now at the end of the First World War, there was a number of German military cemeteries in and around the area of Ypres and further out in the rest of Belgium. As a result of the end of the war, result of still sort of hostile feeling towards the Germans at this point, the Belgian government ordered the German government to remove all their soldiers and place them in one location, which is here. So that's where we are at today. Now, in terms of the battle line, this is an area that was fought over in the first, one of the areas that fought over in the First Battle of Ypres, I believe. But it's that because it sits quite a way behind the lines of of the second battle in 1915, etc. So it's a behind the lines position. So we're going to go up and have a look around. My normal feeling about I normally don't like filming in cemeteries, but this is a unique cemetery and it's my 4th visit here and it has a unique feel, so I feel for this one off exception I do want to film inside because there's some sites within it that I think you'd like to see, and I think that you might get a feeling of what it's like inside this cemetery. However, what I will do is I will keep commentary to a bare minimum when we're filming inside. Okay, so in this chapel area here we have all the names listed. Now these are men with no known graves in and around that fell in and around the Ypres area, fighting for something called in what was known as the Bavarian Reserve Brigade. So Bavarian Reserve Brigade is an important brigade in the First World War and later on because it was a regiment within this larger unit that Adolf Hitler himself fought for. Now when we leave the cemetery I'll explain a bit more about what was so special about that brigade here, specifically at Langemack. And then in this side chapel here, just gives you, there's a map of the Western Front. So we're going to come out here and enter the cemetery properly. So you will notice straight away that there is a remarkable difference between the cemetery, the German cemetery here, and the British Commonwealth War Graves Commission. No white headstones, just all black stones. Now there's a lot of misconception about this cemetery because what you've got is, for a lot of the stones, you've got multiple burials. Now burials here were done at multiple depths, and 4 to a headstone, so 1, 2, 3, 4 going off. There was a lot, for some reason, the school teacher idea is that these people were buried standing up. They weren't, they were just buried lying down, but like I say, they are buried multiple people per plot. Now along here you have the names of the people that are interned in an underground crypt down here, and I'm just going to find here, among which is this gentleman here, Lieutenant Werner Voss, and he died on the 23rd of September 1917. Now, Werner Voss was one of Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron's flying companions and friends, and he's buried here. Now, if you come round here, you'll see it a bit better, but you can see here just how many of these stands there are, and how many names that are on it. But as we move around, you'll see them. So this is the memorial garden to the units, to the people that are buried in the crypt below us here. Along the edge here are the different various Belgian provinces in which the bodies were exhumed and brought here for reburial. Like I said, they were told to remove all the other cemeteries from Belgian territories. And here you've got the capstone for the stairs to the crypt, so you can't go, it's closed off. And then at the end you've got the memorial soldiers there. So like I say, they were ordered to remove them, and they did come here. The soldiers were brought here, and this cemetery was built and designed during the reign of the Third Reich in Germany. And so what you find is here is that you are getting a much of it, you do have that Nazi iconography really build up around it. So now we're moving down towards the far end of the cemetery, where there's some more interesting points, also past the school group that's out here today as well. Okay, so we're coming up now to this far end, and at the far end you've got 3 German blockhouses. So this gives you an idea again of its position. Now, Langemack town itself is back in that direction over to our right, and we're looking off down here. And then when we get up here, there's 2 stories that I'd like to explain. So bear with me whilst I walk there. So as we come through the gap here in the stones, you'll see now that we are now around at the blockhouses here. So these are German defensive positions. Like I say, Langemack itself was behind the lines for most of the war. This was German territory. This is the German front line looking that way now, across into no man's land, into British positions. Okay, now this blockhouse here in particular is the one with the sinister story, because Hitler made a big thing about Langemack. Now, I will explain it better once we leave, because the story of the Langemack story occurs across in the fields over there, and where the car park is, you get a better view, rather than having to try and explain the story past all of these buildings here in the subway system. But something happened here involving the Bavarian divisions that Hitler was obviously proud as a veteran of the Bavarian units. And so when he rose to power, he came up with a way of remembering not only the sacrifice of the Bavarians, but the sacrifice of all Germans. and that was something called Langemack Day. Now Langemack Day was the 11th of November, so it's a day the guns, it fell quiet on the guns fell quiet on the Western Front, and it's a day that we in Britain and around the world remember as Remembrance Day. So Germany still recognise it to some extent, but they saw it as something completely different. But why this one is so sinister is because around about this spot that I'm about to stand in here, about here is where Hitler came to consecrate this cemetery and Langemack Day. And it was the Langemack Day, the Langemack Myth was part of this myth building of as part of that stabbed in the back myth. So as you see here, we're going to look around. Unfortunately you can't get in them, but these, and you can see here just on the panels just how many soldiers remembered per panel. Yeah, but you can see these German blockhouses here. Now we often think of the Western Front as being trench warfare, and specifically when we think of the German positions, we think of extra deep trenches, deep dugouts. Now here in Flanders, as we'd already seen up at, if you've watched my video on the Yorkshire Trench, Flanders has a very low water table. In fact, if you come out to the back of the field here, back of the cemetery here, you can see just how wet it is, and it's only been a few hours of rain. Okay, but we're looking at a topsoil hit. We're looking at the surface level. It's not possible to dig deep. So what do you do if you can't dig in a 45 position? You build it up, and that's what these blockhouses are. They're situated above ground, firing positions at ground level, soil on top to absorb shell fire directly on it, and you've got 3 of them in a close proximity guarding this position. Now ignore the moat around the cemetery, because that is purely a landscape feature more than anything else. But let's just go out to this field here. So your typical Flanders ploughed farm field, and just look how wet it is. Now if you imagine that that's just ploughing, imagine no man's land with shelling unkept, and that's what happens after a few hours of rain. You can see why it turned into such a quagmire of a battlefield. Okay, so like I say, here we are. This is the German position at the cemetery at Langemack, and we're then going to go outside back to the car park. And so I've now come out of the cemetery here at Langemack and moved up into the car park of the cemetery, up so we can look at across these fields here, because this is the area in which the action that I'm going to describe, which led to what was known as the Langemack Myth developing. So it occurs during the First Battle of Ypres. It begins on the 19th of October 1914 and goes through to the 23rd of October 1914. So it's only a short battle in terms of the context of the First World War, 4 days, but in terms of prior wars leading up to it, it's quite a sustained period of intense fighting. And what the Germans are trying to do is capture the town of Ypres. So there's a lot of action, but it's fought between the Germans and a mixture of British, Belgian and French forces all up here at the same time. Bearing in mind at this point in time, British Army is relatively small. We're one of the smallest armies in Europe at the outbreak of the war. Although our army was a professional army, it was made up of a small force of volunteers designed to guard the empire more than anything else. In fact, Admiral Fisher the commander of the Royal Navy at the time had described it as the British Army as a projectile to be launched by the Royal Navy, because the Royal Navy was Britain's primary military arm at this point. With it being an island nation, it was very vastly important. Now, the British Army deploys in 1914, it fights at the Battle of Mons, is pushed back, is involved in the fighting, which will be described in the larger context as the Battle of the Marne, which turns the German army back and forces them back. And like I say, they deploy it in front of Ypres in the early autumn of 1914, and it's here that the Germans are going to launch a major assault, because if they can pierce the line here, which at this point is the various French units up here, but if they can pierce the line through here, they can directly challenge the channel ports of Dunkirk, Calais, Boulogne, and Britain's supply line from Britain onto the continent. And potentially, if they can pierce the line here, there is the argument that something similar to what happened with the German invasion of France and Belgium in 1914 could occur again, where they could roll the British and the Belgians towards the coast and the French down towards into the French hinterland, and again challenge, threaten Paris. So that's what the Germans were trying to achieve here. Now, what occurs is that the Germans attack on the 19th, and it very quickly bogs down and turns into a bit of a stalemate. So on the 20th, a unit, the German Reserve Corps, has approached Langemack on the 19th, marched up all day, slept overnight in the fields outside of Langemack, which is just down here, and on the 20th they will attack across these fields here. Now, they attack, and as we see so often in the history of the First World War, is that it is a bloody slaughter for them. They are unable to challenge too far. As you can see, it's a very rolling landscape, not particularly rolling. Like I said, if you watch the video that I've put out on the Welsh Memorial on the Pilkelm Ridge, these are very low ridges, but each ridge gives you a good line of fire. So they attack British, Belgian, French positions, and they suffer heavy casualties. Now, one of the units, having been bogged down, is reportedly to have stood up, and I believe this was a Bavarian unit, was supposedly have stood up, linked arms, these group of young men, often referred to as students, marched towards the enemy with linked arms, carrying their weapons, singing Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Now, that wasn't the German national anthem at the time, however, it would later be adopted as the anthem after the abdication of the Kaiser. And so when you then get to a report is made about this assault by German High Command on the 10th of November 1914, and this is the beginning of what I referred to earlier in this video as the Langemack Myth. Okay, because this is the myth or the legend that Hitler will seize upon about these young men marching bravely to the victory, bravely to their deaths, despite the overwhelming gunfire, and why he creates Langemack Day on the 11th of November, because the day after that memo is released from German High Command, so the day realistically that it starts to hit the press or the newspapers to hit is the 11th of November, and the perpetuation of that myth, and that's the myth, that one of the myths that he will play upon about Germans' defeat in the First World War, about these brave young men marching to their deaths while singing for German pride. And it's in these fields here that it occurred. The cemetery originally begins during the war period, because for the most part this area that we're standing in, once this battle has taken place, it is under German occupation, but then later on it is extended with reinterments as the bodies are brought in from elsewhere in a concentration. And it doesn't just happen with the Germans, it happens more so because they're not given as much land gifted as much land afterwards, but it also happens with British cemeteries as well. The one that the big British cemetery at Tynecott, for example, is a concentration cemetery because there physically was too many of these little cemeteries for staff to manage, so they closed some down and brought them in. But this is the fields of Langemack and the German cemetery, and that's the story of Langemack Day, or the Langemack Myth.